The sun hung low over the dusty Texas sky, casting long shadows across the open parade ground of Fort Willoughby. Soldiers in crisp uniforms marched in formation, while a modest crowd of civilians' families, ranchers, and townsfolk gathered along the wooden fence to watch. The occasion was simple, a weekend military demonstration meant to impress the public, build trust, and maybe spark some enlistments. Children waved flags. Vendors called out for lemonade and roasted peanuts. At the center of it all stood Colonel Thomas Bradford, tall, rigid, and polished to perfection. His voice boomed across the field like a cannon. Ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. Army prides itself on discipline and precision, and nothing shows that better than marksmanship. A table stood beside him, displaying various rifles and a small stack of silver dollars. He lifted one of the coins and turned toward the crowd with a grin. Think you could shoot one of these in mid-air? Laughter rippled. He turned to his men. Show them how it's done, Sergeant. The sergeant stepped forward, aimed, and fired at a coin the colonel tossed. The shot missed. The colonel chuckled. Tougher than it looks. Anyone else think they can try their luck? He challenged the crowd, clearly expecting silence. That's when a hand rose steady, small, and unexpected. Heads turned. Standing near the back, barely distinguishable in her faded denim overalls and worn boots, was a girl no older than 17. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid. No one had noticed her arrive. She didn't look like she belonged, not with the soldiers, not with the spectacle. Colonel Bradford raised a brow. You, miss? She nodded. The colonel laughed politely. You ever shoot a rifle before? She nodded again. Plenty. Snickers bubbled in the crowd. A girl? Trying to outshoot the army? Someone whispered, This'll be good. Still, the colonel was in no mood to deny what might turn out to be an amusing intermission. He waved her forward. Fine then. Let's see what you've got. She walked calmly toward the platform, her eyes not on the crowd or the soldiers, but the rifle on the table. She reached for it without hesitation, checked the sights, adjusted the butt against her shoulder, like someone who had done it 1,000 times. Then she looked at the colonel. He hesitated just a moment before flipping the silver coin high into the air. It spun, catching the sun, dancing like a glinting butterfly against the pale blue sky. Time slowed. In that instant, the girl didn't flinch. She didn't breathe. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. Crack. The sound rang out like a firecracker. The coin, still mid-flight, exploded into 2 jagged halves, tumbling to the dirt like broken wings. Silence. The crowd stared. The soldiers froze. The colonel's jaw tightened. Then came the sound, a low murmur, swelling into applause, gasps, exclamations. Did you see that? She split it in half. No way that was luck. Cameras flashed. Reporters pushed forward, shouting over one another. What's your name? Where'd you learn to shoot? Are you with a shooting club? But the girl didn't answer. She calmly set the rifle back on the table and turned to the colonel. Her voice, when she spoke, was even and quiet. Thank you. For what? The colonel asked, still stunned. For the chance. And with that, she turned and walked away back through the crowd that now parted for her like water. No smile, no wave. She didn't even look back. As the people behind her buzzed with excitement and disbelief, she melted into the edge of the fairgrounds, past the lemonade stand, past the whispering families, until she was gone. She looked like anyone else. But now, no one would ever forget her. Asterisk. The next morning, her picture was on every newspaper from Texas to New York. Mystery girl splits coin mid-air. Army stunned. Teen sharpshooter leaves fort speechless. Coin sniper vanishes into thin air. Photographers had caught her mid-shot, one hand on the trigger, hair curling from beneath her braid, the look of total calm on her face. No one knew her name. The army didn't take down her information. And no one at the exhibition recalled seeing her before the moment she stepped forward. She had simply appeared, then disappeared again, like a ghost with a rifle dot at Fort Willoughby. The mood had shifted. Overnight. What was supposed to be a clean-cut publicity stunt now felt like a public embarrassment. Colonel Bradford paced inside his office, cigar clenched tight in his jaw. He'd spent 3 decades perfecting his reputation command, control, precision. And now the world was talking about a girl, no taller than his shoulder, who made his best sharpshooter look like an amateur. He slammed his fist onto his desk. "Find her," he barked at his aide. "I want a name. I want a background. I want to know if she's with some show act or a circus." "She didn't seem like a performer, sir," the aide mumbled. No flair, no smile. She didn't even stick around for the crowd. Bradford narrowed his eyes. That was what bothered him most. She hadn't relished the moment, hadn't basked in the applause, or made a scene. That kind of precision came from discipline, not entertainment. In nearby towns, people were already talking. In diners, barbershops, and farmhouses, rumors began to grow. She was a traveling shooter from Kansas. No, she's the daughter of a retired outlaw. I heard she trained in Canada with hunters shot wolves blindfolded. My cousin swears she was one of the Sioux, some kind of spirit shooter. But in one little farmhouse, an old man sat reading the headline at a weathered kitchen table. His name was Jedediah Hart, and he didn't say a word. He just folded the paper, stood, and walked out back where the tall grass grew behind the fence. Lined at the paper was right. The girl had no name that day, but Jed knew exactly who she was. Clara. He'd raised her himself after her. Parents died during the flood of '29. She had been 6. He never treated her like a delicate thing. Clara had grown up stringing fences, patching barns, and gutting rabbits. When the neighbors said, "That's not for a girl," Jed just looked them in the eye and said, "Then don't watch." By the time she was 10, she could knock a soda bottle off a post from 50 yards. By 12, she could shoot the cap clean off without touching the glass. Not once did Jed praise her for it, not because he wasn't proud, but because he believed pride weakened focus. Gifts can rot if you don't earn them every day. He'd tell her. That morning, when she returned to the farm, Clara didn't say a word about the exhibition. She walked straight into the barn, cleaned the mud off her boots, and got to work repairing the chicken coop. Jed didn't say anything either. He just watched from the porch, sipping his coffee, noticing the way. She avoided eye contact, not shame, not fear, just distance, the same kind she always had after a clean shot. That night, the phone rang 3 times. Reporters. He didn't answer. By the next week, Army men came around asking questions. Clara was gone. She's visiting her aunt in Tulsa. Jed said flatly. They nodded, made notes, and left. Later that evening, Jed found a note under his hunting rifle. "Don't worry. I'm not running. Just waiting for the noise to settle. I'll be back. Love, C." He folded it gently, placed it in the old tobacco tin he kept by the bed, and sat down to wait, because he knew the world had just seen her first shot, but it would not be her last. Before Clara Hart stunned the army, before she held a rifle in front of a cheering crowd, she had been just a shadow on a porch swing, a quiet child in the wind-beaten fields of western Oklahoma. Her story didn't begin with a silver coin in mid-air. It began with loss, dust, and the steady hand of a man named Jedediah Hart. Jed had lived through war, drought, and the death of his only daughter Clara's mother. When the river rose in '29, it took both Clara's parents with it. All that was left was a 6-year-old girl clinging to a rain-soaked blanket. her wide eyes staring up at a man she'd only met twice. He didn't hesitate. Jed took her in, fed her, dressed her in her father's old flannel shirts, and put her to work just like he would a son. There was no baby talk, no softness. They lived in a one-room shack with a tin roof and a stove that barely kept the cold out. But it was enough. At 7, Clara learned to drive fence posts with a rusted hammer. At 8, she learned to shoot. Jed had an old bolt-action .22 rifle from the Great War, dented and worn smooth at the grip. One afternoon, after a pack of coyotes got to their last chicken, he handed the gun to Clara without a word. She blinked. "What do I do?" "You shoot," Jed said, "or we starve." She did. Her first shot was clumsy, wide, and low. Jed said nothing, just picked up the shell, tucked it into her hand, and told her to remember what it felt like. Pain teaches, but so does patience. So she practiced, day after day. When other children played stickball in town or read stories by the fire, Clara was out in the wind, aiming at tin cans swinging from fence wire. She learned to control her breathing, feel the twitch of the trigger, and predict a gust before it even came. Jed never gave her compliments. He gave her corrections. Too slow, too tense. You blinked. But once, when she hit 5 pennies off a post in 5 shots, he paused, nodded once, and said, "Your father would have liked that." That was the closest thing to praise she ever got, and it was enough. By the time Clara turned 12, she had surpassed Jed in both speed and accuracy, but she never showed off. She never hunted for fun. Killing wasn't entertainment, it was necessity. If she took down a rabbit, it fed them both. If she missed, they didn't eat. That kind of pressure shaped her differently than any trophy or ribbon ever could. Still, there were moments when she longed for moments when she'd sneak into town and watch boys at the county fair shooting galleries, smiling, winning prizes, being clapped on the back. She would stand quietly at the edge of the crowd, hands in her pockets, and watch them miss targets she could hit blindfolded. But when she tried to enter once, the man running the booth scoffed. No girls. Rules are rules. She didn't argue. She just left and doubled her practice. The next morning, in the evenings, Jed would clean his rifle at the kitchen table while Clara sat nearby, carving notches into her worn leather sling one for every bullseye, every perfect shot. She wasn't counting kills. She was counting control. That's what Jed had taught her. Not glory. Not revenge. Discipline. Anyone can pull a trigger, he'd say. But a real shooter listens to the wind, the earth, the stillness. The shot ain't just the bullet, it's the breath before it. Clara remembered every word. So years later, when the colonel's silver coin danced through the sky, it wasn't the moment she learned to shoot. It was the moment the world finally saw how she had been shooting all along. Asterisk by the time Clara was 16, she could hit a fly off a fence post with her grandfather's rusted rifle. But skill meant little in a world that refused to see past the braid in her hair and the dirt on her boots. In the small town of Marlin Creek, boys lined up each spring for the county shooting tournament. The prize was modest $10 and a ribbon, but the respect was worth more. People came from neighboring towns to watch. It was tradition, honor, glory. Clara had stood behind that rope line for years, watching those boys take their shots. Most of them missed half the time. The crowd still cheered. No one jeered them. But when she stepped up to register that year, holding her own rifle and a quiet, polite smile, the clerk didn't even lift his eyes. "What's this? Trick shooting?" "No, sir," Clara said calmly. "I'm here to compete." The man blinked, looked up, and saw her face. His laugh was loud enough to draw attention. "We don't take side acts. Go put on a dress, girl." Others joined in the laughter. Even some of the boys she'd gone to school with. One of them, a boy named Elliot, called out, "Bring her." A doll instead of a rifle. Clara didn't flinch, didn't answer. She turned, walked back to the fence, and stood still, watching them all miss targets she could have shattered with a slingshot. Her hands were steady, but inside her chest, something cracked, not like a gunshot, but like a quiet stone breaking in a riverbed. That night, she didn't speak at dinner. Jed noticed, but didn't ask. Instead, after the plates were washed, he disappeared into the barn for a long while. When he returned, he carried something wrapped in oilcloth. He laid it gently on the table and stepped back. "What's that?" Clara asked. "Something I should have given you a while ago," Jed said. "It's not for show. It's for purpose." Inside the cloth was a custom-modified Winchester rifle, handcrafted by Jed himself. It was built from the parts of two broken rifles, balanced with a lighter stock, and a hair trigger only someone with absolute control could manage. Clara ran her fingers along the worn steel. "You made this?" "I made it for someone who's got more in her eye than most men have in their whole head." For a long time, Clara said nothing. Then she looked up, and her voice was barely a whisper. "They laughed at me." Jed nodded. "They laugh because they're afraid. They know what you are." "What am I?" He didn't smile, didn't blink. "You're better." And that scares people more than bullets ever will. From that night forward, Clara trained differently. No more bottles or tin cans. She set up complex patterns, swinging targets, split shots, moving branches. She made her own drills. Shot under pressure, wind, blind angles. She carved grooves into fence posts and practiced threading bullets between them from 50 yards. She started keeping a notebook, not of kills, not of targets, but of lessons. Wind speeds, angles, recoil patterns. How the gun felt in the cold versus the heat. She studied her rifle like a language, understood its weight like it was a limb. The laughter she had heard that day? She used it as fuel. Every mocking word, every crooked smirk, they drove her deeper into the craft, into silence, into mastery. She didn't need permission to be dangerous. She didn't need a ribbon to be accurate. The world had laughed once. But Clara Hart was preparing for the day it wouldn't dare laugh again. And when that day came, it would begin with another coin. 3 weeks after Clara split the coin, Fort Willoughby hosted a second exhibition, this time fully sanctioned by the Army and buzzing with press. A platform was built in front of the parade field. A brass band played patriotic songs. Flashbulbs popped. And behind it all, a different kind of energy hummed beneath the surface. The Army needed to reclaim its dignity. Colonel Bradford had orchestrated the event personally. He'd invited Clara officially, this time with a sealed letter and a military escort. The invitation wasn't framed as a challenge, but everyone knew that's exactly what it was. He was giving her a chance to do it again, this time in front of cameras, senior officers, and enough journalists to fill a newspaper for a month. If she failed, the Army could write the first shot off as luck. If she succeeded, they'd have to reckon with her. Clara didn't respond to the fanfare. She arrived alone in a pickup truck with mud on the tires and a rifle case in the passenger seat. She wore a plain shirt, the same leather boots from the first day, and her braid tied tighter than usual. No smile. No nerves. Just the look of someone who had already lived the moment 100 times in her head. "Miss Hart?" Colonel Bradford greeted her on the platform, his expression unreadable. "Welcome back." Clara nodded. "You still flipping coins?" They crowd chuckled. The colonel didn't. He reached into his coat pocket and held up not one, but $2 silver. "We figured we'd up the stakes." Clara looked at him, then at the horizon behind him. No wind, clean air. Her eyes scanned the sky, the light, the distance between herself and the arc she imagined. She nodded once. Toss them. The colonel raised his arm and flicked both coins high into the air one after the other, barely a breath apart. The crowd leaned forward. Cameras rolled. Soldiers froze. Clara raised her rifle. Crack. Crack. 2 shots, like lightning splitting the same sky. Both coins burst apart before they could fall. One shattered so finely that only flecks of silver drifted down like glitter. The crowd didn't erupt this time. They were too stunned. Silence lingered like smoke. Then it began slow, thunderous applause rising into cheers. People stood. Some whistled. A few even cried. Colonel Bradford didn't clap. He walked slowly to where the coin fragments had landed. He bent down, picked up 1/2 of a silver dollar, still warm from the shot. He turned to Clara. "Who taught you?" "My grandfather," she said. Bradford stared at her for a long moment. "You could teach our best men." "I'm not interested in show tricks or stage ranks." "No," he said slowly. "You're not." She walked forward and took the coin half from his palm. "It's not about being better than anyone else. It's about knowing you can be, when it counts." Then she handed the broken coin back to him, turned, and walked off the platform, again without waiting for praise or glory. The crowd parted like a tide. Reporters chased after her, shoving microphones and questions in her face. "What's next for you? Will you join the army? Hollywood's offering contracts. Will you go?" Clara didn't answer. She climbed into her truck, started the engine, and drove off before anyone could stop her. But the world wouldn't forget her this time. That second shot had done more than split a coin. It had split the line between myth and reality. Clara Hart was no longer a mystery. She was a message, and those watching closely knew. She wasn't done yet. Asterisk after her second undeniable shot, Clara Hart became more than a local legend. She became a national sensation. Newspapers dubbed her the sharpshooter girl, the coin splitter, and the Oklahoma ghost. She never gave interviews, never signed autographs, but that only made people more obsessed. Her face was sketched on magazine covers. Her name echoed in dinner tables, radio talk shows, even congressional chatter. And then came the offers. A Hollywood studio sent a formal telegram. Lead role in sharpshooter western, $1,000 a week. No experience needed. She burned it without opening the envelope. An arms company offered her a product deal. Clara Hart's signature rifle. She sent it back with one sentence scrawled in pencil. "Guns aren't for selling dreams." Others came: 2 talent scouts, circus agents, corporate sponsors. They dangled money, fame, glamour. But Clara didn't want lights. She wanted purpose. For weeks she kept to herself. She stayed on the ranch, helped Jed with the cattle, and split wood in the mornings before the sun rose too high. She trained each day behind the barn, in a quiet corner of the world the cameras couldn't reach. She refined her breathing, her stance, her timing. Jed watched, but said little. He knew fame had found her, and so had pressure, but not the kind you could swat away with silence, because alongside the offers came something darker. Threats. The army was embarrassed, not just by the show, but by the questions. Why hadn't they recruited her? Why hadn't she been allowed to serve? Why wasn't there a place in uniform for someone who could shoot better than most men on payroll? Inside the Pentagon, a silent debate grew. One side saw her as an asset, the other saw her as a threat to discipline. What if every girl in America started thinking they could outshoot a man? What if soldiers lost faith in the command structure? So a quiet file was opened with her name on it. Hart, Clara, civilian anomaly. Monitor. Discreetly neutralize if disruptive. She would have never known, except one night, long after dinner. A black sedan pulled up near the edge of the ranch. Jed was on the porch, shotgun in his lap. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They didn't smile. "We're not here to cause trouble, Mr. Hart," the taller one said. "Just to talk." "You picked the wrong hour to talk," Jed replied. "It's about your granddaughter." Yet's grip tightened. The shorter one spoke. "Next, we believe she could be of national service off the record. Quiet operation. She wouldn't wear a uniform, but she'd help the war effort in a very real way." Jed studied them a long time. "She ain't a tool for someone else's war. If you want her, ask her yourself." They exchanged glances. "We plan to." Inside, Clara had been listening from the dark kitchen window. She had already packed a small canvas bag, one change of clothes, a photo of her mother, and a Winchester rifle Jed built. When she stepped outside, the men turned. "I'll go," she said simply. Jed didn't argue. He walked her to the gate. "You don't owe them anything," he whispered. "I know," she said. "But maybe I owe the ones who don't get asked." He looked into her eyes, and for the first time in years, his voice cracked. "Come back with both hands clean." Clara nodded. Then she turned, climbed into the car, and vanished down the dirt road into the dark. The next morning, reporters knocked on the door. Jed told them, "She's gone." "Where?" He looked toward the empty road, then back at the fence. "Where?" She was needed. And that's how Clara Hart disappeared. No one would hear from her for years. But in the shadows of Europe, a legend would be born of a woman who never missed. The war in Europe was a beast of shadows and smoke loud with bombs, but quiet in the alleys where resistance fighters crept like ghosts. That's where Clara Hart reappeared, not in the headlines, not on radio waves, but in whispers past. From village to village. To the public, she had vanished. To a select few in Allied intelligence. She was alive and more valuable than ever. She had no rank, no uniform, and no badge. She didn't need one. Clara had been assigned to a secret unit stationed outside Bristol, England, a training ground for special operatives bound for France, Poland, and Norway. These weren't regular soldiers. They were saboteurs, messengers, demolition experts, and snipers. Ordinary-looking people tasked with extraordinary risks. Clara wasn't there to lead missions. She was there to make them survivable. She trained them in silence rifle work, stealth shooting, breathing techniques, how to feel the shot before the trigger pulled. Her students were men twice her age, hardened and skeptical at first. But when she hit a matchstick from 150 yards in the rain, without blinking, they stopped questioning. They began calling her Ghost Eye. But the name didn't truly follow her until she went into the field. It was supposed to be simple escort a resistance leader from the outskirts of Rome to a safe house. Clara would cover the extraction from a hill 2 clicks away. But an ambush came early. Nazi troops arrived in trucks, spraying bullets into the wheat fields. Pinned down, the operatives radioed for help. "We're trapped 4 guards on the road. Can't move." Clara's voice came over the radio, steady and cold. "I see them. 4 shots. 4 drops. Silence. The 5th guard ran. The resistance leader made it out alive. He never saw Clara's face. Only the glint of light on a rifle far away. Then nothing. Like she was part of the forest. From that day, soldiers began reporting a phantom woman who appeared when the odds were worst and vanished before sunrise. German officers found bodies with single bullet wounds, each perfectly placed. One was found with a card pinned to his chest, the ace of spades split in half. A signature left only once. Rumors bloomed. Some said she wasn't real. Some said she was a myth the Allies made up to scare the enemy. Others said she was death. In boots. Among those who knew her, Clara never spoke about the kill shots. She sat quietly in the mess tents, cleaning her rifle, listening to the wind, studying the dirt beneath her boots like it held secrets. She wrote letters to Jed, but never mailed them. Instead, she folded each one carefully and tucked them into the lining of her rifle case. One day, she received a small box in the mail. No name, no letter. Inside was the half-coin the colonel had once handed her. She stared at it for a long time. Then she carved something into the edge with her knife. For the ones who can't shoot back. Clara's work went on through the end of the war. She never asked for medals. Never stood in photos. Her file was labeled non-existent. But her name was spoken in back rooms of liberated towns, scribbled in diaries, carried in breathless French. No one could trace her exactly. But the moment a shot rang out from nowhere, clean and deadly, someone would whisper, "She's here." And just like that, she'd be gone again. Years after the war ended, Clara Hart returned to the quiet life she had always known. The once famous girl who had split coins and stunned armies was now a shadow among her neighbors, tending her modest farm on the outskirts of Oklahoma. The town of Marlin Creek barely recognized her. She didn't seek recognition. She didn't want it. Jed was gone by then, his worn hands laid to rest beside the old oak tree behind the house. Clara often sat on the porch, the weight of years pressing on her shoulders, the echo of distant gunshots still ringing in her mind. She rarely spoke of her time in the war, or the missions that had made her a ghost in Europe. Her Winchester rifle, worn but meticulously cared for, rested quietly in the corner of her small living room. To outsiders, it was just a relic. To Clara, it was a silent companion, a witness to everything she had survived. One afternoon, decades later, a young historian named Margaret Lawson arrived at Clara's doorstep. Margaret was researching women who had served in secret during the war, piecing together stories from declassified files and whispers in dusty archives. She had uncovered Clara's name, tucked away in intelligence reports, a name that had long been thought a myth. Margaret gently asked Clara if she would share her story. At first, Clara hesitated. The past was a fortress she rarely breached. But something in Margaret's earnest eyes stirred a long-buried resolve. Slowly, Clara began to talk the girl who learned to shoot to survive, the granddaughter of Jedediah Hart, the woman who split a colonel's coin and vanished into history. Her voice carried the quiet strength of a lifetime, lived on the edge between silence and storm. Word spread quickly after Margaret published Clara's story. The world finally met the sharpshooter, who had been there when history demanded precision, courage, and grit. People marveled at how a seemingly ordinary girl had become a legend. In Marlin Creek, a bronze statue was erected on the very field where Clara had first taken the stage and fired that impossible shot. The statue showed her in a calm stance, rifle poised, eyes steady ready. At her feet lay a silver dollar split perfectly in two. Underneath, an inscription read, "She looked like anyone else until she showed the world what courage truly meant." Children came to visit, wide-eyed, learning about the girl who defied expectation and shattered the limits of her time. Veterans paid their respects. Historians praised her quiet heroism. Clara watched all this from the sidelines. Fame had never been her goal. Her satisfaction came from knowing that respect was earned, one shot, one choice, one act of courage at a time. And deep inside, she knew that the spirit of that first shot, the moment the simple coin was split in the air, would inspire generations to come. Because the story wasn't just about the bullet or the coin. It was about the steady hand behind it, the strength in silence, and the courage to rise, no matter the odds. Clara Hart, the girl who looked like anyone else, had become something much greater. She had become a legend.